Hello pre-calculus students, this is Miss Robinson continuing with your section 5.1 notes. We will be going on to example 2 now. Just like with example 1, I will be doing 2 parts to each of the problems, each part of example 2, and then you will be continuing and doing the other 2 parts on your own. Again, these problems should be very similar to what I do with you and straightforward, so you should have no problem completing them and having them checked in your notes. Alright, so example 2, very similar to example 1, except this time we actually have functions, not points or graphs. So let's go ahead and look at I, or the first part of example 2. It has 2 functions, f of x equals 2x squared plus 3, and g of x equals 4x cubed plus 1. Alright, so part A asks us to find f composed with g of 1. Now if we remember our rules, we would rewrite this f as the first function, of g, the second function, of our variable or our entity 1. Okay. Now, just like with before, we're going to start our way on the inside and work our way out. Okay. So first I want to find g of 1. Okay. So if I take my function g and I plug in 1, I'm going to have 4 times 1 cubed plus 1. Okay, so all I did was just take my variable in g and replace it with 1. So I'm just looking at this part right here, g of 1, which if I plug in 1, 4 times 1 cubed plus 1. If I do the composition or the calculation on this one, I should have 4 times 1, which is 4, plus 1, which gives me 5. So this becomes f of 5. Now I have to do f of 5. I'm not quite done yet. So now this is telling me that I need to take my function f and plug 5 into that function. So now I'm going to look back up at my function f and I'm going to plug in 5 in that function. So I'm going to have every x become a 5. So this will be 2 times 5 squared plus 3. 5 squared, 25, times 2 is 50, plus 3, 53. So then I can say f composed with g of 1 equals 53. Okay, so the key to these problems right now when you're first getting used to them is really taking them bit by bit. Alright, the next part I'm going to do with you for the first part of this example 2 is part C. So part C asks us to find f composed with f of negative 2. Okay, so B, f composed with f of negative 2. And if we rewrite that, we remember that that is the same as the outside function, or the first function, f, of the second function, the inside function, f, of our quantity, our variable. This time we have negative 2. Okay, so f of negative 2. Okay, and again I'm going to start my way from the inside and work my way out. So on the inside I have negative 2 and I have f of negative 2. So we're going to look at our function f and we're going to plug in negative 2. So up here we remember our function f is 2x squared plus 3. So anytime I see an x, I'm going to put in a negative 2. So I should have 2 times negative 2 squared plus 3. But we still have this inside of my function f on the outside. Okay, so now I'm just doing my calculations. Negative 2 squared is 4 times 2 is 8. Plus 3 is 11. So this inside part here is really 11. So this is going to be f of 11. Okay, and then we have our last part. So remember that now we have to take this function, which just happens to be function f again, and plug in our new value, 11. So now we're going to do f of 11. And if we Go back to our function. We're going to plug this in for x, wherever we see x. So this is going to end up being 2 times 11 squared plus 3. 11 squared is 121. Times 2 gives me 242 plus 3, 245. So then I can say f composed with f of negative 2 is 245. Alright, so for this first part of this example, I have done with you parts A and C. Now you are going to go back and do parts B and D on your own in your notes for right now. So make sure you go ahead and do this. If you run out of room on this page right here, don't be afraid to attach an extra page or do it on the back. Either way, when I check for notes and when Mrs. Tran-Bloom checks for notes, she will be checking for completion of these parts as well. Same goes with when we do this part here, which we will start right now. So in this part 2 of example 2, I just have new function. So this time my function f of x is the absolute value of x minus 3, and my g of x is 2 divided by the quantity x squared plus 1. Okay. So we're going to start the exact same way we did before. We're going to do a, and remember a asks us to find f composed with g of 1. So f composed with g of 1, which we can rewrite first function on the outside, second function on the inside of our value, what we want to put as our variable. So f of g of 1, and now I can work my way from the inside out. So I'm going to start with g of 1. So I'm going to take 1 and I'm going to plug it into my function g. So I can see here that this is going to end up being 2 over 1 instead of x squared plus 1, still inside of the function f, which, if I do my calculations, I have 2 over 1 squared is 1 plus 1 is 2, so 2 divided by 2, which is 1. So now I'm going to find f of 1. Okay, so then I look at my function f here, and I plug in my value, my new value, 1. So that's going to be the absolute value of 1 instead of x minus 3. 1 minus 3 is negative 2. Absolute value of that is 2. So I can say f composed with g of 1 equals 2. Okay. Same as before, these functions are just a little bit more complicated, so you have to be very careful when you're plugging things in. Alright, now let's do C together. So C asks me to find f composed with f of negative 2. Okay. We're going to rewrite this as f of negative 2. Okay. Again, work our way from the inside out. So I'm going to start with f of negative 2. So I'm going to take my function f, and I'm going to plug in negative 2. So if I do this, I should have the f remaining on the outside, and then absolute value of negative 2 instead of x minus 3. Okay. Negative 2 minus 3 gives me negative 5, so this ends up being f of the absolute value of negative 5, which is positive 5. Okay. My next step is to find f of 5. So now I'm going to take my function f again, and I'm going to plug in 5 for x. Now 5 minus 3, all in the absolute value. 5 minus 3 is 2. Absolute value of that is still just 2. So then I would say f decompose with f of -2 is 2. Okay. And then your job for the rest of this problem is to find parts b and d for this set of functions as well. Okay. So in your notes, you should be adding and attempting problems on your own, getting some of your own practice in this time. These problems are fairly straightforward. You just need to be very careful with plugging in values and making sure you're doing your functions in the correct order. And then, of course, writing down your functions correctly, taking the correct one that you are looking for. Okay. So for this one, my suggestion is just to show your work and be very careful where you're putting things. Other than that, this should be very straightforward for you to follow along with, and make sure that you are trying those parts that I have put out for you to complete on your own, because those will be checked in your notes. Okay. That is it for tonight's video notes. Okay, so make sure you get those things done. We will see you in class tomorrow. Thank you and have a good night.